Well, hello, my Sparkle students. I wanted to give you a quick overview of factoring. So let's look at this first problem here. This first problem is 15m minus 10c plus 5. So no matter what is going on, if they're asking you to factor, the first thing you want to ask yourself is there a common factor? Well, right now, these are terms. So 15m is the first term, minus 10c is the second term, and plus 5 is the third term. Okay, so what you're asking yourself is there one number that goes into all three of those terms? Again, 15m being the first, minus 10c being the second, and plus 5. Well, yeah, I can divide all of them by 5, right? 5 will go into 15, 5 will go into negative 10, 5 goes into itself. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pull out that 5, and then I'm going to divide each term by that 5. Okay, so then what's left over? Well, if I do 15m divided by 5, I get 3m. If I do negative 10c divided by 5, I get negative 2c. And if I do 5 divided by 5, I get a 1. Now, you definitely need that 1 in there because you should be able to multiply this back and get what you started with. So let's see. 5 times 3m, there's your 15m. 5 times negative 2c, there's your negative 10c, and 5 times 1 is 5. So this is factored, okay? Well, the second one here, it doesn't have any numbers other than a 1, right? There's a 1 in front of the a, there's a negative 1 in front of that a, and there's a 1 in front of this a. But they all have the same letter in common, right? This has an A, this has an A, and this has an A. So like this one where the number, well, where the greatest common factor could be a number, it could also be a letter. So I'm going to take, just like I did this one, I'm going to take each one of these and divide it by A. Well, what happens is the A's cancel out and you're left with X. The A's cancel out, you're left with a negative Y. And the A's cancel out here and you're left with a Z. You should be able to multiply this back. A times X, AX. A times negative Y, negative AY. And A times Z is AZ. Well, let's look at one where, okay, so this one was a number. This one was a letter. Let's look at this one where it's numbers and letters. Okay, so there's two terms here. 16x cubed is the first term, and 20x squared is the second term. Now look, for the number 16 and 20, I could do 2. But it's not the largest, and that's what you're looking for. You're looking for the largest number. The largest number is a 4. And notice how they both have a letter x. This has 3 of them, x cubed. This has 2 of them, x squared. So you take out the largest number and you take out the smallest letter. And again, by the letter, I mean the exponent. Okay, so you either had x cubed or x squared. You're going to take out the largest number, the 4, and the smallest letter, x squared. And then I'm going to take each term and I'm going to divide it by 4x squared. So you bring down the 4x squared. So 16 divided by 4 is 4. Now, when you divide letters, x cubed divided by x squared, you actually subtract the exponents. So this would be an x to the first power. You could put the 1 in there, but you don't typically see it. Again, x cubed divided by x squared would give you just simply an x. And then if I did 20 divided by 4, I would get the 5. And here the x squares would cancel out. Again, I should be able to multiply this back and get what I started with. Let's see, 4 times 4, that's 16. And when you multiply letters, x squared times x, you add them. So x cubed. When you divide, you subtract. When you multiply, you add. And then if I did 4x squared times 5, I would get 20x squared. All right? So it could have a number. It could have a letter. It could have numbers and letters. All right, well, let's look at this one down here. Okay, this one has 4 terms. 15x to the 5th minus 12x to the 4th plus 27x to the 3rd minus 3x squared. So I have to ask myself, hey, is there one number that goes into all of them? Well, yeah, 3. 3 goes into 15, 3 goes into negative 12, it goes into 27, and it goes into itself. They all have the same letter, x to the 5th, x to the 4th, x third, x squared. So what's the rule? The largest number, the smallest letter, right? Your choices were 5, 4, 3, 2. The smallest letter is x squared. Then you take each term and you divide it by the 3x squared. Okay, so your answer here would be the 3x squared. If I divide this out, this would give me 5. Again, you subtract the letters, so x to the 5th minus, or divided by x squared, you'd subtract them, x to the 3rd. Sorry, that's a little sloppy, but negative 12 divided by 3 is negative 4. There's 4 x's on top, there's 2 on the bottom, you subtract them, there'd be 2 left over. 27 divided by 3 would be plus 9. There are 3 x's on top, there's 2 on the bottom, that leaves you with 1 left over. And again, you can put that 1 there, but you typically don't see it. And remember, anything divided by itself is a 1. The x squares cancel out. You should be able to take this and multiply it back and get what you started with. Let's try that. 3x squared times 5x cubed would be 15x to the, remember you add them, to the 5th. 3x squared minus 12x squared is negative 12x to the 4th. Again, you add them. 3x squared times a positive 9x is positive 27x cubed. And 3x squared times negative 1 is negative 3x squared. All right, so again, you can have a single number, you could have a single letter, you could have numbers and letters together. Okay, this is called factoring out the GCF. All right, here's another one. So I've got 14, 8, and 2. They're all divisible by 2. And then we went with different letters just to mix it up. They all have the letter P, so I'm going to take out a single P. And they all have the letter Y, and the smallest one of that is a Y. I divide each one of these by 2py, and you end up with this. You should be able to multiply it back. 2 times 7 is 14. P to the first times P to the first would be P squared. Y to the first times y squared is y to the third. 2 times negative 4 is negative 8. P times, well, it would just be a P. And then y times y, when you multiply them, it would be y to the first times y to the first, which would be y squared. And 2py times a positive 1 is a positive 2py. Okay, so this is the answer here. All right, so this is where they say factor, but it's factoring out the greatest common factor. Okay, now this one literally says factor by grouping. Okay, grouping. Well, if you look at it, there's 2 terms here. This all counts as 1 term, and this one counts as 2. Again, if you look back over here, there's 3 terms here, there's 3 terms here, there's 2 terms here, and there are 4. 1, 2, 3, 4 terms there. Okay, and the 1, 2, 3 terms here. Okay, so factor by grouping, there's going to be 2 terms, bam, 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 bam. Now notice that the x plus 1 and the x plus 1, that is the common factor. That's what you pull out, okay? And then what's left over is literally what's left over. X squared plus 2, that's what's left over, okay? So this is going to be the first part, and then x squared plus 2 is the second one, okay? It's called factor by grouping. You're grouping them. Well, this one, let's say it doesn't say factor by grouping, but it just says to factor. Well, the first thing you'd look at to see, does it have a common factor? Well, you think, well, 6 and 9 and 6, I could divide all those by 3. That's true, but you can't divide the 4 by 3. So that's not going to work. And you say, well, what about 2? Well, 2 would go into here, and it would go into here, and it would go into here, but it's not going to go into here. So when you say factor by grouping, you're going to be splitting them in 2 on the left and 2 on the right. So literally, I'm just going right down the middle. Okay, right down the middle. And then I'm going to do the same thing I was doing over there. I'm going to look at this 6x cubed minus 9x squared. I'm going to say, hey, what's the largest number that goes into both of them? A 3. And they both have the same letter, so I'm going to pull out the smaller letter. And then I'm going to divide each one of them by 3x squared. And what I end up with is 2x minus 3. And you should be able to multiply that back and get what you started with. Okay, then on this side, forget about that side for a minute. Look at the 4x and the minus 6. The only thing they have in common is a 2. You can't pull out a letter because the 6 doesn't have a letter. It's not common to both. You're going to divide both by 2, and then look at this. Lo and behold, you end up with the same thing. That's not a coincidence. That is the part of the answer. So the answer would be the 2x minus 3. And then what's left over? What's left over is the 3x squared. See, it's right there. And this would be a plus 2. Well, how do I know it's plus? Well, because it's not a minus sign, and every number is either positive or negative. So it's plus 2. So this is the factoring of this. Okay, again, this is called factor by grouping them into pairs. Okay. Now this one, excuse me, it says factoring trinomials. Well, trinomials just means that there are three terms here, okay? And again, you do the same thing. Is there one number that goes into all three? Nope. Is there one letter? No. But I do know that this is going to turn into very similar to this one down here. It's going to turn into two parentheses like that. Well, how do I know that? Well, typically when it starts with an x squared like that, or a p squared, or a t squared, whatever letter they're using, you more than likely can factor that, okay? So we're going to turn this trinomial, we're going to turn it into one of these groupings where we have four terms. Easy peasy, I promise. Now, some people will just guess and say, I can figure this out. I don't need to do all this. Maybe, and that's great. But I'm going to show you if you want to learn how to do it this way. So you're going to replace that 7x with two new terms, right? Because we want 4. We only got 3 right now. 1, 2, 3. So what we do is we say, what are the factors of 10? Factors of 10. What numbers multiply to give me 10? Well, I could do 1 times 10. I could do 2 times 5. But whatever number you choose, they have to combine to give you that middle term. That middle term is the 7. Well, 1 and 10, I don't care how you make it. 1 positive, 1 negative, whatever. You can't make a 7. But if I took 2 and 5, I could make a 7. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to keep the first. We're going to keep the last. And we're going to replace that middle one. Keep the first. Keep the last. Replace that 7x with 2x and a 5x. You got to put the letter in there, even though up here there's no letters. It's just a multiplication symbol, but you need the letters, okay? If you're replacing 7x, you need it to be 2x and 5x. And then I would do the same thing. I would split it down the middle. I would put x squared plus 2x on one side. I'd put 5x plus 10 on the other side. I would do the exact same thing. I'd pull out the greatest common factor. I would divide both of them. I would get this, okay? Looking over here, I'm going to pull out a 5. Okay, there's no letter on that 10, so you can't pull out a letter, just a 5. And then lo and behold, you get the same thing. It's not a coincidence, guys. It's supposed to be that way. So x plus 2 is part of the answer. And what's left over is literally what's left over, the x and the 5. And you got to have a sign between them, so plus. Okay, and if you multiply this out, if you use what they call the FOIL method, you would get this. Okay, this is Factoring 101. All right, so here's the last one. I might even do another one for more complicated ones, but this is just to get you started. So again, this is a trinomial. There's 3 terms here. There's not one number that goes into all 3, and there's not one letter because the 12 doesn't have a letter. But because this is a square, I can more than likely factor this, okay? So we're going to say, what are the factors of 12? Right, here they are. 1 and 12, 2 and 6, and 3 times 4. But I know that the 2 numbers that I choose are going to have to combine to give me a negative 8y because I want to replace that one. Well, the only thing that makes even the most sense would be 2 and 6. But the key is you got to make them both negative because you have to combine them to be a negative 8. So it's going to look like this. Keep the first, keep the last. Keep the first, keep the last. We're going to replace that negative 8y with negative 2y minus 6y. And it doesn't matter which one I put first, so don't get hung up on that. It doesn't matter. I promise it'll work out the same. I promise. Okay, so I'm going to split it down the middle right here. I'm going to put the y squared minus 2y on the left. And I'm putting, make sure you keep the sign, that negative 6y plus 12. I'm going to pull out the greatest common factor over here, which would just be the letter y. I divide both of them by y, and I get y minus 2. You can do the math with me. And because this one's negative, I'm more than likely going to need to pull out a negative. And you'll know if you don't pull out a negative, then these two won't match. And remember, the key is these should match. Okay, so I pull out a negative 6. I'm not pulling out a letter y because that doesn't have one. Divide both of these by negative 6, and lo and behold, look what I get. The same thing. There's the answer. And then y minus 6 is in the other one. So this is your basic factoring out the GCFs, factored by grouping, and then factor trinomials. I'll probably do another one of these videos. I hope you find them healthy. I hope you find them helpful. Anyway, have a great day.